In the gleaming steel and glass canyons of New York City, empires aren't just built, they're defended. For billionaire Adrian Beaumont, the walls of his empire were crumbling. A predator cloaked in family ties was moving in for the kill, ready to strip him of his legacy, his name, and his entire fortune. The lawyers were powerless, the accountants saw no way out. The battle was all but lost. But the one person who held the key to his salvation wasn't a Wall Street titan or a legal genius. She was the woman who cleaned his floors and polished his silver, a woman he barely saw a woman with everything to lose. This is the story of how Brenda Jackson, a maid from the Bronx, found a single piece of paper hidden for 50 years and brought a corporate kingmaker to his knees. Brenda Jackson believed that you could learn everything you needed to know about a person by the way they lived in private. For the past 3 years, she had worked as the sole housekeeper for Adrian Beaumont, and what she had learned was that he lived like a ghost in his own life. His home, a sprawling 3-floor penthouse overlooking Central Park, wasn't a home at all. It was a museum of wealth curated with cold precision. The Italian marble floors were so polished they reflected the joyless grey sky. The modern art on the walls was chosen for its investment value, not its beauty, and the furniture, all sharp angles and muted colours, seemed to repel the very idea of comfort. Brenda's day started before the sun rose over the Bronx. A bus, a train, and then another train delivered her to the Gilded Cage on the Upper East Side. She was a woman of routine and quiet dignity. At 58, her hands were knotted with the work of a lifetime, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She saw the faint film of dust on the spines of books that were never opened, the single whiskey glass left by the window each night, and the way Mr. Beaumont's shoulders seemed to carry an invisible, crushing weight. Adrian Beaumont was a man forged in the crucible of generational wealth. He'd inherited Beaumont Industries, a global logistics and tech conglomerate, from his father, a man he spoke of with a mixture of reverence and resentment. Adrian was sharp, ruthless in business, and perpetually isolated. He moved through his own home with the distracted air of a man constantly calculating risk, his conversations always on speakerphone, as if he couldn't be bothered to hold the device to his ear, were a staccato of demands and dismissals. He rarely acknowledged Brenda beyond a curt nod. She was part of the machinery of his life, like the silent air conditioning or the automatic window shades. An invisible presence. Brenda didn't mind. Anonymity was a form of protection. It allowed her to work to send a significant portion of her paycheck to her son, Michael, a brilliant young man in his second year of law school at Columbia, and to retreat back to her small, vibrant apartment that smelled of fried plantains and her late husband's pipe tobacco. Her world was real. This penthouse was a fantasy. But in the last few months, the fantasy had begun to curdle into a nightmare. The tone of Mr. Beaumont's calls had changed. The usual arrogance was frayed with something sharp and unfamiliar fear. The name that echoed off the marble walls most often was Gregory Finch. Gregory Finch, Mr. Beaumont's cousin. Brenda had seen him a few times. He had a politician's smile that never reached his eyes and wore his expensive suits with a studied nonchalance. When he visited, the atmosphere in the penthouse grew thick with a cloying, false camaraderie that quickly soured into barbed remarks the moment he left. "He's circling Bill Misto." Beaumont had barked into his phone just last week, pacing a groove into a Persian rug. The SEC filings, the leak to the Wall Street Journal. It all has Finch's fingerprints on it. He's not just trying to drive down the stock. He's trying to cut my legs out from under me. Brenda, while dusting a bronze statue in the hallway, had frozen. She knew better than to listen, but the raw panic in his voice was impossible to ignore. This wasn't business. It was a blood feud. The pressure was clearly taking its toll. Mr. Beaumont was sleeping less, eating almost nothing, and the pristine order of his study had descended into a controlled chaos of scattered files and overflowing ashtrays. He looked haunted, a king trapped in his castle, watching an enemy army assemble at the gates. One Tuesday morning, Brenda arrived to find the penthouse in a state of disarray she'd never witnessed. Cushions were thrown from the sofa, books were pulled from shelves, and drawers were left agape. It wasn't the work of a burglar, it was the frantic, desperate search of a man looking for a lifeline. She found him in his study, slumped in his leather chair, staring at the skyline. He looked defeated. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, his voice raspy. He had never addressed her by name before. It was always a nod or a gesture. "Mr. Beaumont," she replied, her voice even. "Just clean the main living area today. Leave the study." She nodded, gathering her supplies. As she turned to leave, he spoke again, more to himself than to her. "My father. He always said the devil was in the details. Turns out he was right." Brenda went about her work, her movements methodical and calming in the face of his silent storm. She understood desperation. She had faced it when her husband passed away, suddenly leaving her with a mountain of medical bills and a teenage son to raise. She had faced it every month when the rent was due. But this was different. This was the desperation of a man who had everything staring into an abyss where it could all be taken away. And as she wiped down the mahogany shelves in his father's old library, a room Adrian rarely entered, she couldn't shake the feeling that the ghost of the old man, the founder of the empire, was watching this whole tragedy unfold. The library was the one room in the penthouse that felt alive. Unlike the rest of the sterile apartment, it held the warmth of old paper and worn leather. It was the heart of the original owner, the formidable Arthur Beaumont, a man Brenda knew only from the imposing oil portrait that hung over the marble fireplace. He had a stern gaze, but his eyes held a glint of something Brenda recognized shrewd intelligence. Adrian avoided this room, claiming it was mausoleum-like, but Brenda was drawn to it. It felt solid, permanent. While Adrian's world was one of fleeting digital transactions and volatile stock prices, this room was built on paper ink and wood. Her task for the day was a deep clean of the extensive bookshelves. It was a painstaking job she did twice a year, taking each book, wiping it down, polishing the wood behind it. She worked her way along a massive wall of legal texts and first editions. Towards the bottom, behind a row of matching leather-bound volumes of corporate law from the 1970s, her finger snagged on something. A slight misalignment in the wooden back panel of the bookshelf. Brenda was meticulous. She noticed things others didn't. A loose thread, a faint smudge, a panel that wasn't perfectly flush. She pushed gently. Nothing. She ran her fingers along the seam, feeling for a latch or a button. Near the floor, almost completely obscured by the baseboard trim, her nail caught on a tiny, almost invisible indentation. She pressed it. With a soft click that was shockingly loud in the silent room, a section of the back panel about 2 feet wide swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a dark, narrow cavity. It was a hidden compartment, a secret safe built into the very bones of the building. Brenda's heart hammered against her ribs. This was not her business. Her job was to clean, to remain invisible. Finding a secret compartment in her billionaire employer's home was a line she had never imagined crossing. Her first instinct was to close it immediately, forget she ever saw it, and continue her work. No good could come from this. But curiosity and a deeper sense of premonition held her fast. Mr. Beaumont's desperate search that morning, his muttered words about his father, and the details, it all coalesced into a single powerful feeling that this was important. She pulled out her phone, using its flashlight to peer into the dark space. It was mostly empty, save for a single long leather portfolio, the kind used for important documents. It was sealed with a wax stamp bearing the Beaumont family crest. The leather was stiff with age, and a fine layer of dust coated its surface, suggesting it hadn't been touched in decades. With trembling hands, Brenda reached in and lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. She placed it on the floor and stared at it, her mind racing. This was Mr. Beaumont's property. Private. Secret. To open it would be an unimaginable breach of trust, but to leave it when he was so clearly drowning. What if this was the very thing he had been searching for? What if it was the detail his father had hidden? She thought of her son, Michael. He was studying contract law. He spoke of clauses, addendums, and loopholes with a passion she admired. He believed the law at its best was a tool for justice. Her gaze drifted to the portrait of Arthur Beaumont above the fireplace. The old man's painted eyes seemed to challenge her. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Brenda made a decision. She carefully broke the brittle wax seal. Inside the portfolio was not a stack of stock certificates or bearer bonds, as she might have expected. It was a single document, a dozen pages long, bound by a faded blue ribbon. The paper was thick, creamy, and covered in dense, elegant cursive, interspersed with typewritten paragraphs. The title on the first page read, "Addendum to the Founding Charter of Beaumont Industries, effective upon my death, to be revealed only under conditions of existential threat to the company's integrity or lineage. Signed Arthur Beaumont. June 10th, 1975. Brenda sank back on her heels. Her hands shook as she scanned the pages. It was written in complex, archaic legal jargon, a language entirely foreign to her. Words like fiduciary duty, provenance of control, and clause of moral turpitude swam before her eyes. It was overwhelming, impenetrable, but she understood enough to grasp the gravity of what she held. This wasn't just an old piece of paper. It was a final command from the grave, a ghost's hand reaching out to steer the ship he had built. And from the few phrases she could decipher, it seemed to be a set of rules, ironclad, unbreakable rules, governing who could control the Beaumont Empire, and more importantly, how. She quickly placed the document back in the portfolio, slid it into the hidden compartment, and clicked the panel shut. It blended seamlessly back into the bookshelf. No one would ever know it had been opened. But she knew. As she resumed her dusting, her motions were automatic. Her mind was a whirlwind. She had stumbled into the very heart of the war between Adrian Beaumont and Gregory Finch. She was holding a weapon, but she had no idea how to use it, who it was meant for, or if firing it would save her employer or blow up in her own face. The invisible woman had just found the secret that could change everything. The weight of the secret sat on Brenda's shoulders for the rest of the day. Every footstep Mr. Beaumont made in the rooms above, every clipped phone conversation that drifted down the stairs, felt like an accusation. She finished her shift in a haze of anxiety and fled the oppressive silence of the penthouse for the noisy, comforting chaos of the city. That evening, in her own small kitchen, the smell of sautéing onions and garlic. Doing little to calm her nerves, she knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed an interpreter, someone who could translate the dead language of the law into something she could understand. She needed Michael. She waited until she knew his last class was over and called him. "Hey, Ma." His voice came through warm and bright. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, baby. How are your studies? Brutal?" He laughed. "Torts are killing me. But I think I'm getting the hang of it." "What's up?" Brenda hesitated. How could she explain this without sounding crazy? Michael, I need to ask you something. It's a hypothetical legal question. Hypotheticals from you are never good. Did Mrs. Henderson's dog dig up Mr. Rodriguez's prize-winning petunias again? No, nothing like that. Brenda said, a faint smile touching her lips. This is different. It's about corporate stuff, big company stuff. She took a breath. Let's say there's a company founded a long time ago, and the founder wrote a document like an addendum to the main company charter, and he hid it. And this document lays out special rules for who can run the company. Would something like that, would it still be legal? After all these years? There was a pause on the other end of the line. She could hear the faint sound of pages turning the scratch of a pen. Michael was in his element. An addendum to the founding charter, that's called a corporate codicil, or a testamentary instrument, depending on how it's structured, he said, his voice now sharp with academic interest. Its validity depends on a lot of things. Was it properly witnessed? Was the founder of sound mind? Was its existence alluded to in other corporate documents? But in principle, yeah, Ma, absolutely. A founding charter is like a constitution for a company. A properly executed addendum, especially one with specific instructions on succession and control, could be legally binding. It could supersede decades of subsequent bylaws if it's worded correctly. It would be a nuclear option in a boardroom fight. Why are you asking? Brenda's blood ran cold. A nuclear option. I'm just curious. She lied, her voice thin. I saw a movie. Michael didn't sound convinced, but he let it go. Well, in your movie, tell the good guys to look for something called a contingency of control clause. Old-school founders, the real empire builders, they sometimes put those in. They're morality clauses, basically. They might say something like, control of this company can only be held by a direct blood descendant who has not engaged in acts of moral turpitude that would bring dishonor to the family name or the company's reputation. It's a way for a dead man to keep his descendants in line. Brenda's hand tightened on the phone. Clause of moral turpitude. That was one of the phrases she'd seen. Thank you, baby. You're a smart boy. You make your mother very proud. Love you, Ma. Don't watch too many crazy corporate thrillers, okay? After she hung up, Brenda sat in silence. Michael's words had given her a key. This wasn't just about lineage. It was about character. It was a test. The next day, the tension in the Beaumont penthouse was palpable. The news had broken overnight. A major financial outlet, citing an anonymous source, had published a scathing article detailing a formal SEC investigation into Beaumont Industries for insider trading and market manipulation. The stock was in freefall. Mr. Beaumont was a caged animal. He paced his study, a whirlwind of fury and despair, his lawyers on a perpetual conference call. "It's Finch!" he roared, slamming his fist on his desk so hard that a porcelain cup rattled. He fed them the documents. He's been manufacturing this for months, twisting the data from the Singapore acquisition. He's making it look like I personally profited from insider knowledge. The board is panicking. They're calling for an emergency meeting. Brenda could hear the sharks circling. Gregory Finch wasn't just launching a corporate raid. He was destroying Adrian Beaumont's reputation, salting the earth so that even if Adrian survived, his authority would be shattered. Armed with her new understanding, Brenda knew she could not wait any longer. Waiting was a luxury none of them had. She had to go back to the library. She needed to read the document again, but this time with Michael's words as her guide. During her lunch break, when she knew Mr. Beaumont was locked in his office on his call, she slipped back into the library. Her heart pounded as she retrieved the portfolio. She didn't have time to read the whole thing. She scanned the pages, her eyes racing, looking for the key phrases Michael had mentioned. And then she found it. Article 4, Section 2, the Beaumont Proviso. It was exactly as Michael had described. The language was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. It stipulated that any potential successor or person vying for a controlling interest in the company, whether by blood or by acquisition, must be free of any verifiable act of corporate espionage, malicious falsehood, or any action deliberately intended to destabilize the company for personal gain against another family member. It went on to state that any such action, if proven, would render that individual's claim to control null void and irrevocably forfeit. It was a poison pill, designed by a patriarch who foresaw the possibility of a Cain and Abel-like conflict amongst his heirs. Arthur Beaumont had armed his legacy with a self-destruct mechanism against treachery. Gregory Finch, in his brilliant, ruthless campaign to destroy his cousin, had unknowingly been writing his own disqualification. He was systematically violating the very clause that would allow him to take power. The document wasn't just a shield for Adrian, it was a sword that could sever Gregory's ambitions permanently. But then Brenda read the next section, and the blood drained from her face. The proviso had a second part. It also demanded that the sitting CEO, the current leader of the Beaumont line, must govern with unimpeachable integrity and transparency, and that any failure to do so, if it threatened the long-term health of the company, could trigger a review by the board to seek a more suitable leader within the bloodline. This was a double-edged sword. It could save Adrian from Gregory, but it also held Adrian himself to an impossibly high standard. Given the current SEC investigation, even if it was a frame-up, this document could just as easily be used to oust Adrian as it could to block Gregory. Everything depended on who wielded it first and how. Brenda carefully put the document back. The situation was infinitely more complicated and dangerous than she had imagined. She couldn't just hand it over. She had to choose her moment. Presenting this atomic bomb at the wrong time could result in total annihilation for everyone involved. For 2 days, Brenda carried the secret like a hot coal in her pocket. She watched Mr. Beaumont grow more haggard, his confidence eroding with every market report and every call from his increasingly nervous board members. The emergency board meeting was set for Friday. It was Wednesday. Time was running out. Brenda knew she had to act. The thought terrified her. She was the Maid, a woman paid to be invisible to leave no trace. To deliberately step into the center of a billionaire's corporate war was madness. It was a betrayal of the unspoken contract between servant and master. She could be fired on the spot, accused of theft, or worse. Her simple, orderly life could be shattered. She thought about what to do all through her commute home. She could mail the document anonymously to Mr. Beaumont's lawyer. She could leak it to the press. But those options felt cowardly and uncontrollable. The document was too complex, too dangerous. It needed context. It needed a human voice. It needed her voice. That night, she laid out her uniform, ironing it with extra care. She polished her sensible black shoes until they shone. If she was going to walk into the lion's den, she would do so with her head held high. She was not just a maid. She was Brenda Jackson, Michael's mother, a woman of substance and resolve. The next morning, Thursday, she arrived at the penthouse with a resolve so firm it felt like a physical shield. She did her preliminary duties, her hands steady, her mind clear. She waited for the right moment. It came around 10 a.m. Mr. Beaumont had just finished a brutal call that left him visibly shaken. He was standing by the vast, floor-to-ceiling windows of his living room, staring down at the city that was turning against him. He looked utterly alone. Brenda walked silently from the kitchen, holding a silver tray with a single cup of black coffee, just the way he liked it. She never served him directly like this. Coffee was simply left on a sideboard. This was a deliberate breach of protocol. She approached him and stood quietly a few feet away. He didn't turn. "I don't want coffee," he said, his voice flat. "I think you might need it," Sir Brenda said, her own voice calm and even. He turned, then his eyes narrowed in irritation at the interruption. "I told you." His words died in his throat as he looked at her. Really looked at her perhaps for the first time. He didn't see a uniform. He saw the unwavering certainty in her eyes. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, confused. "Is there a problem?" "The problem, sir, is that you're looking for a weapon in your arsenal when the one you need is in your foundation." Adrian Beaumont stared at her, baffled. "What are you talking about? Have you been listening to my calls?" His voice was sharp, accusatory. "I don't need to listen to the calls, Mr. Beaumont. I see the signs. You're fighting a snake and you're trying to use a businessman's rule book." "That won't work," Brenda said, setting the tray down on a nearby table. "Your father didn't play by those rules either." The mention of his father made Adrian flinch. "You know nothing about my father. I know he built this company to last," Brenda replied, her courage building with every word. "I know he didn't trust easily, and I know he was smart enough to leave behind a fail-safe, a message for his son." His expression shifted from anger to a guarded, intense curiosity. "A message? What are you talking about?" This was it, the point of no return. "Yesterday I was cleaning the library. Your father's library," she began, choosing her words with care. "Behind the law books on the south wall, there is a loose panel. I found a hidden compartment. Inside, there is a leather portfolio." Adrian's face was a mask of disbelief. He strode past her, heading directly for the library. Brenda followed her heart, pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He didn't ask for directions. He went straight to the shelf she had described and ran his hands along it, his movements frantic. Where he demanded his voice, a low growl. Brenda pointed to the tiny indentation near the floor. He crouched down, his expensive suit creasing, and pressed the spot. The panel clicked open. He stared into the dark void for a long moment before reaching in and pulling out the leather portfolio. He stood up, wiping a stray bit of dust from the cover. He looked from the portfolio to Brenda, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions, suspicion, confusion, and a tiny, desperate flicker of hope. "You opened it," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, I did," Brenda said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I believe it contains what you've been looking for. It's an addendum to the company charter from 1975. Adrian's hands fumbled as he broke the already broken seal and pulled out the document. His eyes, accustomed to scanning complex financial reports, in seconds devoured the first page. He read it, then read it again. He looked up at Brenda, his face pale. "The Beaumont proviso," he whispered the words, tasting alien on his tongue. "It cuts both ways," Sir Brenda said quietly. "It can stop Mr. Finch, but it can also be used against you." For a moment, Adrian's suspicion returned sharper this time. "How would you know that? What is this, a setup? Are you working for him? Did Finch put you up to this?" The accusation stung, but Brenda stood her ground. "Mr. Beaumont, for 3 years I have cleaned your home. I have seen you at your best and your worst. I have washed your glasses and made your bed. My son is in law school because I work here. My integrity is all I have. It is not for sale. I am not helping you for a reward. I am helping you because what your cousin is doing is wrong, and because I believe the man who hired me is better than the man who is losing this fight." Her words hung in the air, a stunning, absolute rebuke of his paranoia. The silence in the library was profound. There was only the sound of the old document crinkling in Adrian Beaumont's trembling hands. He looked at the paper at the portrait of his father, and finally back at the woman standing before him. The woman he had never truly seen. And in that moment, the master of a global empire realized he was utterly, terrifyingly out of his depth. And this quiet, dignified woman was the only person in the world who could show him the way out. Adrian Beaumont was a man who trusted data legal precedents and calculated odds. He did not trust feelings, and he certainly did not place his faith in unexpected discoveries by his housekeeping staff. His mind, trained to see traps in every opportunity, was screaming at him that this was too perfect, too convenient. A long-lost, legally binding document appearing at the 11th hour, it was the stuff of fiction. And yet the paper in his hands felt real. The ink was faded in a way that couldn't be forged. His father's signature, that bold, arrogant slash he knew so well, was undeniably authentic. "I need to make a call," he said, his voice strained. He turned and walked back to his study, the document clutched in his hand, leaving Brenda alone in the library. She didn't know if she should stay or go, if she had just saved him or sealed her own doom. She chose to wait. She had come this far. She would see it through. From the study she could hear his voice, low and urgent. He wasn't speaking to his team of high-priced corporate lawyers. The tone was different, more respectful. He was speaking to someone from his father's world. After 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, he emerged. He looked at Brenda, his expression unreadable. "My father's former counsel, William Abernathy, is on his way. He's 85 years old, but his mind is still a steel trap. He's the only one who would have witnessed the original charter. If this is real, he'll know." An hour later, a frail but impeccably dressed old man with piercing blue eyes was escorted into the penthouse. William Abernathy moved slowly, aided by a cane, but he radiated an aura of formidable intellect. He greeted Adrian with a curt nod and was led to the study. Brenda, at Adrian's stiff request, brought them water, and then retreated to the kitchen, her ears straining for any sound. The murmur of voices from the study went on for over 2 hours. Finally the door opened. Mr. Abernathy stood in the doorway, leaning on his cane. He looked at Adrian, then his gaze found Brenda in the hall. Young man Abernathy said to Adrian, his voice a dry rustle of old paper. "For 30 years I advised your father. His greatest fear was not a market crash or a hostile takeover. It was that the bloodline would produce a wolf, or worse, a complacent sheep." This document, he said, tapping the portfolio now lying on the desk, was his answer to both. Abernathy took a slow step towards Brenda. "Your father trusted very few people, Adrian, but he believed that character was not found in a boardroom, but in the quiet corners of the world. He would have been impressed," he said, giving Brenda a small, respectful bow of his head, "by Mrs. Jackson's astuteness and integrity." Coming from this man, the words were a thunderclap. Adrian looked stunned. The last vestiges of his doubt seemed to evaporate, replaced by a terrifying new reality. The document was real, the threat was real, and the solution was as dangerous as the problem. After Abernathy left, a new kind of silence settled over the penthouse. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, but of frantic, concentrated thought. Adrian paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "The emergency board meeting is tomorrow at noon," he said, thinking aloud. "Finch will be there. He'll present his case, the SEC investigation, the stock price, my failed leadership. He'll move for an interim CEO to be appointed, pending the outcome of the investigation. It will be him, of course. He's already promised a controlling interest to 2 of the board members in exchange for their votes." He stopped pacing and looked directly at Brenda. This proviso. Abernathy confirmed it. It's an atomic bomb. If I detonate it, the fallout could destroy us all. Gregory's actions leaking false information to destabilize the company for personal gain against a family member. It's a clear violation of Article 4, Section 2. It would not only block him, but could open him up to a massive lawsuit from the company itself. But he continued pointing at the document. There's the other edge of the sword. The part about the current CEO's unimpeachable integrity. Finch will use the SEC investigation against me. He'll argue that I have failed to meet the standard set by my own father. He'll try to turn my own weapon against me. A fragile, unspoken alliance began to form in that room. The rigid lines between employer and employee blurred, replaced by the shared urgency of a crisis. He was no longer just Mr. Beaumont, the distant billionaire, and she was no longer Mrs. Jackson, the invisible maid. They were two people in a foxhole, with a single unpredictable weapon between them. "What do you think I should do?" Adrian asked. The question was so unexpected, so contrary to his nature that Brenda was taken aback. He was asking her. She took a moment to gather her thoughts. "Sir, you cannot fight a lie with a spreadsheet. You've been trying to prove your innocence to the board with facts and figures. But Mr. Finch is not fighting with facts. He is fighting with a story about your failure. You need a better story." "What story?" Adrian asked, his frustration mounting. "The story of this document," Brenda said, her voice gaining strength. "The story of your father. He didn't write this because he feared failure. He wrote it because he feared corruption. This isn't just a legal document, Mr. Beaumont. It's a statement of values. Mr. Finch's story is about greed. Your story has to be about legacy." He stared at her, a new light dawning in his eyes. He had been so focused on the legal mechanics of the proviso that he had missed its soul. Brenda, with her simple, profound clarity, had seen it immediately. "He's cornered me." Adrian admitted a note of vulnerability in his voice she had never heard. "My lawyers say fighting the SEC charges will take years and millions of dollars. By then, Finch will have sold the company for parts. I have no move. Maybe the move isn't to deny his accusations," Brenda suggested softly. "Maybe it's to make them irrelevant." The idea hung in the air. A plan began to form, a desperate, high-stakes gamble that would depend not on lawyers, but on timing courage and the moral weight of a 50-year-old piece of paper. For the first time in months, Adrian Beaumont felt a surge of something other than dread. It was the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of a fighter who had just been handed a new weapon and a strategist to show him how to wield it. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation, with Brenda Jackson no longer a spectator, but a quiet, essential participant in the War Council. The morning of the board meeting dawned grey and oppressive, the sky over Manhattan, the colour of slate. The Beaumont Industries stock had opened another 5% down. The siege was at its peak. Adrian had been up all night with William Abernathy, who he had recalled for his counsel strategizing. They weren't preparing a defense. They were preparing an attack. Brenda arrived that morning to find a different man. The desperation was gone, replaced by a cold, focused calm. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, like a suit of armor. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, meeting her in the foyer. "I have a car waiting for you downstairs." Brenda looked at him confused. "Sir, I need you at the meeting," he said simply. Brenda's breath caught. "Mr. Beaumont? I can't. I'm your housekeeper." "What would I do there?" "You are the custodian of the evidence," he replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You found it. Your testimony to its discovery is crucial." Mr. Abernathy agrees. "You are a material witness, but more than that, He added his gaze, softening for a fraction of a second. You understand what this is about, better than my own lawyers. I need you there. Brenda felt a wave of fear, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of purpose. She nodded. I will have to go home and change. I've anticipated that, he said, gesturing to a garment bag hanging on the closet door. I had my assistant procure a few options. I hope they are suitable. Brenda was speechless. Inside the bag was a simple, elegant navy blue dress, a string of pearls and low-heeled shoes. It was a gesture of respect so far beyond their established relationship that it moved her deeply. It was an acknowledgement that today she would not be an employee, but an equal. The Beaumont Industries boardroom was on the 80th floor of a skyscraper in the financial district. It was a cathedral of corporate power, with a table of polished obsidian, so long it felt like it stretched into the horizon. The view of the city was breathtaking, but no one was looking at it. All eyes were on Adrian as he walked in. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Gregory Finch sat at the opposite end of the table looking smug and composed. He gave Adrian a thin, predatory smile. Adrian, glad you could make it. I was worried you might have tendered your resignation already. Would have saved us all some time. The board members, a collection of grim-faced men and women who controlled billions in assets, shifted uncomfortably. They were here for a public execution. Brenda entered a moment after Adrian, alongside the elderly William Abernathy. Her presence caused a ripple of confusion. Whispers broke out. Who is that woman? Gregory Finch's smile faltered for a second. He saw her not as a threat, but as an anomaly, an unexpected variable he couldn't place. That in itself unsettled him. The meeting began. The chairman, a long-time Beaumont ally who was now clearly wavering, laid out the grim agenda. Gregory Finch was given the floor first. He was masterful. He spoke with a feigned sadness, painting a picture of a company in crisis led by a CEO who had lost his way. He presented documents, the ones he had leaked, that seemed to show clear evidence of insider trading around the Singapore acquisition. He spoke of his duty to his family's legacy, to the shareholders, to the employees. He was a savior, not a usurper. Therefore he concluded, his voice ringing with false sincerity, I must move for a vote of no confidence in Adrian Beaumont, and propose that the board appoint an interim CEO to guide us through this crisis. I humbly offer myself to serve in that capacity. The room was silent. Gregory had laid his trap perfectly. The board members looked at Adrian expecting a desperate point-by-point rebuttal of the financial data. They expected him to fight on the battlefield Gregory had chosen. Adrian stood up slowly. He did not look at the documents or the board members. He looked at his cousin. Thank you, Gregory, he said, his voice dangerously calm. An impressive presentation. A masterpiece of fiction woven with just enough truth to be plausible. He then turned to the board. You have been presented with a story about financial misconduct. I will not bore you by refuting it here, as that will be handled by the SEC and the courts. My lawyers are already filing a suit for slander and market manipulation against Mr. Finch. No, I am here today to talk about something more important than a quarterly report or a single acquisition. I am here to talk about the foundation of this company. He looked toward the door. On cue, William Abernathy walked slowly to the table, placing the old leather portfolio in the center. Some of you may remember William Abernathy, my father's chief counsel, Adrian said. He is here to authenticate a document that was recently discovered. A document my father, Arthur Beaumont, wrote in 1975. He opened the portfolio and held up the addendum. This is a legally binding codicil to the founding charter of Beaumont Industries, and it contains a very specific clause, Article 4, Section 2. We're calling it the Beaumont Proviso. Gregory Finch began to laugh a short, sharp bark of disbelief. A secret document, really, Adrian? This is your defense. Some dusty piece of paper you've cooked up. It was witnessed and notarized. Gregory Abernathy interjected his voice, cutting through the noise. I was there, and its legitimacy will be easily verified in a court of law. Adrian continued, his voice resonating with newfound authority. The proviso is simple. It states that no person can assume control of this company if they have engaged in acts of corporate espionage or malicious falsehood intended to destabilize the company for personal gain against another family member. He let the words hang in the air. The board members stared, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock as the implication sank in. They looked from Adrian to a suddenly pale Gregory Finch. Every action you have taken in the last 6 months, Cousin Adrian said, his eyes locking onto Gregory's, from the anonymous leaks to the fabricated data you presented today, has been a direct violation of this proviso. You have not been orchestrating a takeover. You have been signing your own disqualification. According to the foundational laws of this company, your claim to leadership is, and I quote, null void and irrevocably forfeit. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Gregory Finch's face, which had been a mask of confident triumph, had collapsed into a canvas of shock and rage. This is absurd. A farce, he sputtered, rising from his chair. You can't be serious. We are a publicly traded 21st century corporation, not some medieval fiefdom ruled by a ghost's decree. On the contrary, William Abernathy stated, his voice steady and clear, commanding the room's attention. The principles of corporate governance dictate that the founding charter is the supreme law of the company. This proviso is as legally binding today as the day it was signed. Your actions, Mr. Finch, are a textbook case of what Arthur Beaumont sought to prevent. But Gregory was a cornered animal, and he was not going down without a fight. He rallied his cunning mind, seizing on the only weapon he had left. He turned his venom on Adrian. And what about you, Adrian? He snarled, pointing a trembling finger across the table. Let's say this. This fantasy document is real. What about the other half of it? I've had my people looking into you for a year. Let's talk about the unimpeachable integrity clause. The SEC investigation is real. He is compromised. This document doesn't just disqualify me. It disqualifies him. The proviso calls for a suitable leader from the bloodline. Well, here I am. Perhaps my methods were distasteful, but I acted to save the company from his incompetence and corruption. It was a brilliant, desperate pivot. He was attempting to use the proviso's double-edged nature to create a stalemate, one he hoped to win in the ensuing chaos. The board members looked uncertain again, caught in the crossfire. This was the moment Adrian had prepared for. He didn't flinch. You are right, Gregory, he said, and a hush fell over the room. No one had expected him to agree. The investigation is real, and the proviso does hold me as CEO to the highest standard. He took a deep breath. For the past 5 years, I have run this company with a focus on one thing: profit. Growth at all costs. I have been ruthless. I have been cold, and I have put the share price above the principles upon which my father founded this business. I lost my way. The pressure, the expectations. I allowed a culture to develop that made a frame-up like yours possible. In that, I have failed, and for that, I am accountable. It was a stunning admission. He wasn't making excuses or defending himself. He was taking responsibility. He was demonstrating the very integrity the clause demanded. He then turned to Brenda, who had been standing silently near the wall. The credit for this discovery, for reminding me of what this company is supposed to stand for, does not belong to me or to my lawyers. It belongs to this woman. This is Mrs. Brenda Jackson. For the past 3 years, she has been my housekeeper." He paused, letting the statement sink in. The board stared at Brenda, who met their gazes with quiet dignity. While I was blind to the corrosion in my own house, she was the one with the clarity to see the truth. She found the proviso. She had the courage to bring it to my attention at great personal risk. She, a woman who earns in a year what this board spends on a lunch, has shown more loyalty and integrity than my own blood. He walked over to Brenda's side. "Mrs. Jackson, will you please tell the board how you found the document?" In a clear, steady voice, Brenda recounted the story, the misaligned panel, the hidden compartment, the old portfolio. She spoke simply without embellishment. Her plain honesty was more powerful than any legal argument. She wasn't an executive or a lawyer. She was a witness, and her testimony was unshakable. When she finished, Adrian addressed the board one last time. "Gregory Finch's actions have disqualified him from any role in this company's future. My own actions have put this company at risk, and I accept the board's judgment. However, I am not the same man who walked into this room an hour ago. My father's message has been received. Effective immediately, I am commissioning a fully independent third-party ethics committee to review all of our recent acquisitions and corporate practices. We will cooperate fully with the SEC, and we will be transparent with our shareholders. We will rebuild the foundation of this company on the principles of integrity my father laid down in this very document." He looked across the table, his eyes burning with conviction. "My father's proviso was a test. Gregory, you failed it. I, for a long time, was failing it as well. Today that changes. Now the board must decide. Do you stand with a man who tried to burn this company down for his own gain? Or do you stand with a man who is vowing before all of you to rebuild it, the right way, guided by the wisdom of its founder? The reckoning was complete." Gregory Finch stood there, exposed and defeated, his narrative of greed and treachery laid bare against a more powerful story of legacy and redemption. He had been so focused on the money, he had completely forgotten about the man who made it. The board members looked at each other. There was no longer any question. The vote was a mere formality. The king was saved, the usurper was cast out, and the invisible woman had become the conscience of an empire. The aftermath was swift. Gregory Finch was removed from the board and his position. Faced with the proviso and Adrian's lawsuit, his allies abandoned him. The SEC investigation, upon receiving full cooperation and evidence of Gregory's manipulation, eventually shifted its focus to him. In the quiet of the penthouse that evening, the city lights twinkling below, Adrian Beaumont poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Brenda, who was waiting to go home. She hesitated before accepting it. "I don't know how to thank you, Brenda," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved more than my company today. You saved me from myself." "You saved yourself, Mr. Beaumont," she replied softly. "I just helped you find the map." "Adrian," he corrected her. "Please, call me Adrian." He looked at the remarkable woman before him. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. But I'd like to start. Your son Michael. You said he's in law school. When he graduates, I want him to come work for us. We're starting a new corporate ethics division. I want him to help build it." Tears welled in Brenda's eyes. This was more than money, more than a reward. It was a future for her son, a validation of everything she had worked for. "And as for you," Adrian continued, "I would be honored if you would consider a new position. Not as my housekeeper, as my personal advisor, a consultant to the office of the CEO. I need someone to tell me the truth, Brenda. I need someone to help me see the details I'm missing." Brenda Jackson looked from the whiskey in her hand to the man whose life she had irrevocably changed. Her world, once small and contained, had just expanded into a future she could never have imagined. She had entered this gilded cage as a servant, but she would now be its most trusted guardian. She smiled a genuine, radiant smile. "I'd like that very much, Adrian. Brenda Jackson's story is a powerful reminder that heroes are not defined by their wealth or their title, but by their character and their courage." In a world of corporate giants and billion-dollar battles, it was the quiet integrity of one woman that changed everything. She proved that paying attention, speaking truth to power, and doing the right thing are not small acts. They are the foundation upon which empires are saved and legacies are redeemed. Her story isn't about a maid who got lucky. It's about a woman who was always worthy, and who finally found herself in a place where her worth could shine. It reminds us that there is incredible power in the people we overlook, and that sometimes the person who holds the key is the one who has been there silently all along. If this story of courage and unexpected heroism moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that one person can make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that will inspire and amaze you. Thank you for listening.